Let me try and quickly run through this before I ask Professor Tikli to give us the frame of the project at the international level. There's this early context of education, since I'm looking at education in India and speaking to the SDGs a little bit. We do believe that we have a constitutional frame with which we started our strong public education system in the frame of the values of justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. But however, we were not able to translate this into education policy, which was our first policy in 1968. And therefore, the colonial link between quality and privilege sort of remained intact, as J.P. Naik writes in his works. And the only time when we started universalizing basic education was in the 1990s with the World Bank funds and loans. And this was, of course, a time when there were huge gender disparities and very poor institutional capacities and so on in different areas. So 30 years of reform have actually really taken us at a place where we find being influenced increasingly by donor-led international discourses, and of course the coming in a big way of private players. And more recently, we are really looking at the challenge of ideological contests, which are in the area of curriculum and pedagogy itself, and they've really sort of exponentially grown in the last few years. So even though in the middle of neoliberal reforms, we had a very progressive school curriculum, the NCF, and we had a teacher education curriculum framework, and it was backed by the right to education, but we find that we haven't been able to, despite this, really offer quality education. So did privatization start by default, and now, of course, it's become a choice, so to speak, because we saw that enrollments completely sort of derailed in state schools and moved to a private sector school network, which was largely unregulated. People have written extensively about this, and there are a large number of state schools who've been emerged over the period. And today we stand at a place where our children between the ages of 6 and 18 are actually about 1/3 of them attending private schools, and learning levels are, of course, quite a challenge. And there's been a deep commercialization of the teacher education sector for a long, long time. In fact, we have 90% of teacher education institutes that are in the private hands, and about 80% at the time we wrote the report in 2012, the Justice Verma Committee report. Today, of course, the percentage of children in state schools may have gone down from 80 to 70, but what is happening now is that even the in-service training, supportive training, has been now outsourced to all kinds of philanthropic, they are now called philanthropic organizations, but I think the more correct word would be non-state actors. The COVID-19, of course, has created a big push for digital learning, and we find that quality education, which was already reduced to learning outcomes, in the pandemic, we are now saying that perhaps learning outcomes and quality education is no longer about learning experiences, it's no longer about peer learning, about co-construction of knowledges, about student-teacher relationships, and it's easier for the pandemic kind of a situation that we are in for governments to push to look at digital education as the future. And this is happening in a big way, both at the policy level, at the level of institutions, whether higher education or at the level of school, because this is now going to actually become the new form of exclusion and educational inequality. So what is being used is a veneer of objectivity to create a more homogenized curriculum at all levels, and digital learning, to my mind, has the deepest potential to create passive citizens, passive recipients of both culture and authoritarian governance. So if you look at the expansion of higher and professional education, teacher education I've already talked about, 90% over in the private sector, and so is professional education, whether it's engineering or whatever. And the last 2 decades, of course, we find even liberal education getting more and more into the hands of private organizations. And the critical thing is that we have a large number of first generation higher education learners. So they come with their own set of challenges in terms of curriculum materials, in terms of the languages that they are comfortable with. And of course, public universities have been starved of funds, and the private sort of sector takes over. The persistent challenge, of course, of quality education remains. And I think there have been multiple attempts, even in the middle of neoliberal reforms, to actually create some kind of quality education framework that addresses the concerns and needs of our society, but I think we've not been able to be successful there. What we've actually done then is to make educational inequality itself institutionalized, both within the public school system and within the private school system. So educational inequality, to my mind, has exacerbated all the existing social, economic, regional, gender inequalities that are in our society. And clearly the demographic dividend that we've been talking about is in danger of becoming, as they call, a disaster. So when we look at education for sustainable development, we have three major aspects to look at. One is to universalize what we are calling quality education, which means we have to rethink what it means to address the inequality in the education itself, actually, and also to link the content, goals, practices of what we mean by quality education with sustainability concerns, which include both social and environmental. So we are looking at poverty, gender, social, economic, livelihoods, sustainable cities, and climate action. So why SDG 4 is the focus of this particular project at ESF? Let's look at the propositions that SDG 4 tells us through the UN Charter. It says that SDG 4 should enable us to help people for upward social mobility, which is a key to escape poverty. Now, the challenges are that hierarchies of caste, hierarchies of community, religion, language, poverty, all of this manifests as exclusion, but via mechanisms of educational inclusion. So while we are talking about educational inclusion, I think we need to understand how exclusion is happening through those very forms which we are calling inclusion. And the second aspect that is proposed is that education help reduce inequality of all kinds, gender, social, economic. But the challenge is that educational inequalities, which are being institutionalized through policy, not only measures, but now the 2019 new policy that has come in, that is going to institutionalize a segregation of schools and segregation of teacher education institutes. The SDGs don't necessarily address the question of educational inequality. And the third thing it talks about is how education can foster peace, tolerance, social harmony. But I think this is the biggest challenge for us at the moment, because this has deepened in the Indian society, given the kind of political climate and hegemonies of power. And of course, the hierarchies of caste, community, religion, etc. continue, and they're entering into the classroom in many new different forms. So if you look at the specific targets, which Aroma has already spoken about of SDG 4, even though SDG 4 target number 4.7 is crucial to this project, I would like to flag 4.1 because there is a huge challenge. So we can't just talk about complete, free, equitable primary and secondary education, because we did have an RTE in place in 2009. But what we find is that the new education policy trajectory is subverting the RTE. So the RTE itself has become a tool of neoliberal reform. And there's an institutionalization of segregation, as I was talking about. The policy clearly talks about underrepresented groups. And now the digital push that's coming with the pandemic, they're also talking about actually profit making within the ICT sector in order to create products for the underserved communities. The second important target is the 4.5, which is about eliminating gender disparities. I know that this is subsumed in 4.7 also, but I would like to flag the idea that the decision about girls' education is dynamically related to all other aspects of inequities, whether it's caste, minority status, poverty, and so on, that impacts that. And 4.7, of course, is the heart of it. It does take in, but the challenge, as I said, is the policy emphasis that is towards standardization of curriculum and learning outcomes, and the absence of curricular rootedness in diversity. So we are not looking at curricula in terms of looking at issues of social justice, issues of equity. We are still looking at curricula in very homogenized manners. And 4.C, of course, is the means, as was said earlier, that we need, and this is very critical, that we don't have enough professionally qualified teachers. So not only do we have large teacher vacancies, we have poorly qualified teachers. And as I said, the in-service sector is being outsourced in the name of philanthropic non-state actors. Free services completely commercialized, and the policy is not looking at this at all. The gaze of the policy is only in terms of creating teachers from within underrepresented groups, as if that is the answer. So what are the critical propositions, propositional responses that we may have? One is that we need to examine the conceptual shifts that we want to also envision perhaps and create in the meanings and purposes of education. Perhaps questions of modernity will have to be looked at, questions of capabilities will have to be looked at, and understand what we mean by quality education. Second is to problematize education itself. Don't we need to know how education itself has actually perpetuated these injustices, whether they are social, gender, economic, environmental, and how they are being sustained through education? And then specifically look at the question of educational inequality, because that is what is now impeding, apart from other inequalities which are exacerbated. Exploring how linkages between school and higher education and the social and environmental sustainability can be fought. That's the heart of our discussion. We need to get at that. Those are the research questions we have to articulate and find out what we can do through co-production of knowledges. And lastly, of course, looking at higher and professional education, how we can transform those to develop critical knowledges, because these are epistemic challenges that we have. I mean, one, there is epistemic injustice, which is all in the realm of, completely sort of critiquing colonial knowledges, trying to understand how we can decolonize our thinking, all of that. But I think in the realm of sustainability, in the realm of creating sustainable societies and a sustainable development plan, we need to look at knowledges which could be more critical, capacities, agency of the different stakeholders towards a more just and environmentally and socially just society.